Company's Zero Move Games, and we're based out of Brookline, Massachusetts. And my name's Chad Ellis, and this is Succession: Intrigue in the Royal Court. So the idea of Succession is the king is getting old and needs to name an heir to the throne. He's narrowed his choice down to 5 candidates, and you're not one of them. So instead, you're a lesser figure in the royal court, and your goal is to become the favorite of whoever the king finally does choose. So you're going to spend your energies manipulating what the king thinks about the 5 candidates and what the candidates think about you and the other players. And your goal is that whenever the king finally makes his choice, whoever he chooses likes you better than any of the other players. It's a board game, and but there's the central mechanic is card-driven. So there are intrigues, which are rumors, good and bad reports, anything that might make the king think better or worse of some of the candidates. And what you're going to do is play those intrigues to push candidates up or down in the king's esteem, and then you're trying to control the credit and blame for those intrigues so that the candidates think you're responsible for the good things and that they think the other players are responsible for the bad things. And there's a lot of negotiations and deal making that can come around with this, because if you've got, if something bad has happened to one of the candidates and you're controlling the spin, you can try to extort money from the other players, by threatening to have them blamed for it. This is the first game that I ever designed. I designed it while I was actually living in Germany. I was working for a company that had closed down the division I was working in, so I had about 3 or 4 months before they really admitted they were closing it down, but where we had nothing to do. And so it was a very weird, kind of funky mindset to be in, and I've always wanted to create a game, so this was the first game that I created. Working for Siemens Mobile, actually. I was running a marketing department for them, so it was a completely different world. But I've been a gamer my whole life, and so I just really wanted to create my first game. And I actually started the company with a friend of mine, and who also wanted to design games, and this was one of the first games that we published. We did it the easy but expensive way, which is we didn't have to convince someone else to do it because we were starting our own company. So we found a printer that we liked, and through our playtesters, we talked about who we should have do the art. And everyone agreed that we should ask Phil and Foglio to do the art for us, because the humor of the game is very much in keeping with the style of humor that they have. And so we approached them with the project, and they were interested, and they did it. And so that's why we have the Foglio art. But it's really just everything, we just did it all ourselves. Battleground Fantasy Warfare is our flagship game. It's basically, in simple terms, it's a tabletop miniatures game that uses cards instead of miniatures. So it's like we took the whole tabletop miniature market and extracted the gameplay from the miniatures and just went with the gameplay. What that lets us do is take out, almost all of the cost, all the setup time, all the painting, all the things like that make miniature games so work intensive, and just focus on the gameplay. It also lets us have a command and control system that's based on standing orders rather than direct control, which I think is the most exciting thing about the game, because most miniature games, when it's time to move your pieces, you move them any way you want. You have direct control over all of them, and if a unit can move 5 inches, you can move it 3.5 or 4, or just whatever you want to do. It's what I call the hive mind model of generalship. We wanted to create something that was more like being a general in charge of an army. So in Battleground, you give your units orders like close, hold, and attack at range, and you write them right on the card with a dry erase marker. And then every turn, your units obey the orders they've got. So your whole army is advancing without you having to do anything to it. And then you have a limited number of command actions you can use to influence the battlefield as the game progresses. So it's much more like being a general in charge of a low-tech army, where you can't be everywhere at once, and you have to decide what are the 2, 3, 4 most important things that you're going to do that turn. It's expandable in that every faction, there are lots of different factions, so you can have elves or orcs or humans or lizard men, lots of different factions. Each faction has 2 different deck types. There's a starter deck and a reinforcement. A starter deck gets you everything you need to play. That has 18 unit cards, which is enough to build 2 1,500-point armies. It gives you the command card deck for that faction and 2 reference cards. A reinforcement deck gives you 50 additional unit cards. And the decks are non-random, so if you have both decks, then you don't need to buy any more cards for that faction. So if you want to have the whole Elves of Ravenwood army, you buy these 2 decks and you've got everything that you need. In terms of the non-collectability, we've had a lot of people really like it. Miniature gamers have actually been our biggest fans for Battleground. We were a little worried when we came out with the game that miniature gamers might say, oh, it's on cards, that's not really my thing. But the command and control system has won a lot of them over because it gives a much better gameplay experience. And then the fact that even if you really love your models, sometimes you don't have the time, or sometimes you want to have more flexibility, or sometimes you want to have a miniature game that you can carry around in your pocket. So people who really love tabletop war games have been huge fans of Battleground, and that's been our biggest success. So 2 years ago, we won the Origins Award in the Vanguard category, which is a category for games that break out of existing categories. So we weren't, Battleground isn't a miniatures game, it's not a card game, it's basically, expanding what it means to be a miniatures game, I think. So they didn't feel comfortable putting it just in the miniatures category. It certainly wasn't a collectible card game because it's not collectible. And so they nominated us in the Vanguard category, and we won. So it was great.